Now, speaking of the other side of politics, let's catch up with Labor frontbencher Ed Husic now, who joins us from Parliament House in Canberra. He's the Shadow Industry and Innovation Minister. Good to talk to you again, Ed. There's so much spending going on. It's really changed the dynamic, hasn't it? The coalition can't criticise Labor for the way you blew out deficits and debt back in the day, and yet it's very hard for you to also promise to outspend this coalition.
Well, I think that what we need to put to rest now is this criticism that we copped post-GFC about the size of budget deficits and the fact that the coalition would tackle debt and deficit. And now we've seen, 8 budgets where they haven't been able to produce a surplus, despite repeated claims that they would get straight onto it. And tonight we'll probably see the biggest budget deficit in Australian history. So, it's not about outspending or saying that we can do massive cuts. It's about doing what's right for the economy and the community. I think that's the key thing. But we're going to obviously wait and see. I mean, they've announced so much of this budget. You sometimes wonder why Josh Frydenberg will even bother to stand up at 7:30 when they've yes. pre-released so much of the detail.
Surely
but we will see, and we do have to see the finer detail.
Yeah, look, it is extraordinary. Now, I was very critical of Labor's big deficits and the debt that was racked up back as part of the GFC. Yeah, back of the GFC stimulus. But that's true. That criticism is just pointless now. That's all part of history because the numbers now are eye-watering. Now, we all know there's a reason. We all know that the whole world's been hit by this pandemic. But you mentioned the highest ever, the deepest ever deficit. And, of course, our debt, government debt, will go to the highest levels ever, near enough to $1 trillion. Should we be worried? Or is this all a reasonable response to the circumstances in which we find ourselves?
I think given the economic circumstances, we needed to make sure that we could look after people's health and the broader economy. Jobs, big issue, particularly in my part of Western Sydney where people were affected. And it's not just a matter of having the financial support there in the short term. It's about being able to make sure that people can get jobs longer term as well, and that they're prepared for that. And we got everything in place to ensure that. And when we're looking at in terms of what the coalition's putting forward with their budget deficit, seeing from them why, they should justify why they are spending the amounts that they are, because they've made it a big focus when they've been in opposition to criticise this. So we should see out of them an explanation as to why the amounts that they're putting forward, they are putting forward. In many cases, I'm just going to make the point that a lot of this stuff has been as a result of political pressure in various arenas, be it how long it's taken to respond on mental health issues, aged care funding that they have cut, that they're now having to restore in this budget tonight, the type of issues that we've been concerned about when it comes, for example, with respect to pay inequity between men and women and what we need to do to support childcare, better support childcare as a workforce participation measure and as an economic measure as well, which now we see the coalition, after deriding it, are going to set to embrace it tonight. So, again, it'll be on to them to explain why 12 months ago some of the stuff that they said didn't need to be done now has to be, and why and how they're going to pay for it.
Now, both sides of politics have agreed over recent years that you need to get federal government spending down to below 25% of GDP. It seems it's a widely accepted target. The coalition took a long while, but they eventually got there just before the pandemic. How long should it take to get back to that goal? Can we afford to wait 5 years? Is it going to take 10 years? I mean, we're going to see government spending tonight. We await the figures, but we think it's going to be around 33%, around a third of the economy.
I think I'm going to be very careful about answering that question, Chris, because it's about making predictions that really we need to draw on the advice of Treasury and the RBA about the future performance of the economy. I will say this, though, a lot of what they're saying, for example, they've made constant claims about where wages growth would head in the upcoming financial year, which doesn't pan out at all. And, I'm very careful about taking on face value anything that they say with respect to where the economy is going to be and where people are within that over the course of the next few years. And as a result, I'm not going to be making any bold proclamations as to when, in terms of your question, certain things should come back into alignment.
Just one quick question, if I may. The pandemic has impressed on all of us how we need to be more self-reliant as a country. Do we need to be doing more? Do we need to see something in the budget about that economic nationalism, making more stuff here?
Well, you're absolutely right to raise this. I mean, the pandemic highlighted the fact that when we needed certain things, we just didn't have them at hand because we've been so dependent on global supply chains. We do need to rethink manufacturing, the way that we undertake that on Australian soil. I've got to say, in the time I've been Shadow Industry Minister, the reactions I get in particular through Labor's championing of Australian manufacturing and some of the stuff that I've done particular in making sure that we're, for instance, we produce some of the best steel on the planet, and we need to make sure that some of the pressures they've gone through, steel to steel sector, that we are supporting local steel making, particularly through avenues of procurement. We do need to see that. The government cut, when coming into office, a lot of the stuff that we had in place to promote local manufacture. After the pandemic, they'd realised what a bad decision that was. They reinstituted similar arrangements that Labor had in place. And even though they made the announcement, it's taking a hell of a long time for the money to actually hit the sectors and hit the businesses that need that level of support. And so it will be interesting to see tonight how far they've got. They announced in October some of that investment. How far they intend to proceed over the coming 12 months will be very interesting to see. But people want to see the renaissance of Australian manufacturing in this country.
They sure do. Thanks a lot for joining us, Ed.
Good on you, Chris.
Labor's Ed Husic there. I think both sides of politics will be wanting to talk about this, doing more, manufacturing more in this country. It's always been popular, always been necessary, but especially in the wake of the pandemic, that has really amplified that message to most people in this country.